My sister called my son a bastard at every family event. That sentence is the ugly truth that defined our holidays for 5 years, and it is the memory that finally drove me to destroy her perfect life. I am Nolan, and I am a physical therapist with a good practice. I had my son Oliver when I was 27. His biological father, a mistake I learned from quickly, bailed when I was 6 months pregnant. I didn't care much. I had my career, and my parents, Marcus and Eleanor, were amazing, helping me with babysitting and showering Oliver with the kind of love only first grandparents can give. For the first year, life as a single father was demanding but peaceful. My older sister, Holly Bennett, was the primary source of my usual family headaches, but she lived 3 hours away. Holly always had to be the perfect one. She had the investment banker husband, Bryson, and her 2 children, Zoe and Blakely, were already on track for Harvard before they hit double digits. They played the violin and spoke 3 languages. Holly's superiority complex never bothered me much until Oliver arrived. In the beginning, she mostly ignored him at major holidays, talking loudly about Zoe's latest Bollet scholarship or Blakely's perfect score on a national math test. I figured she was just jealous that her kids weren't the only grandchildren soaking up attention anymore. I dismissed her as merely being self-absorbed, but when Oliver started walking and talking, the comments began. The first time was at Easter dinner. Oliver was 18 months old, just a wobbly toddler, giggling as my dad helped him hunt for brightly colored eggs in the tall grass. Holly watched from the deck, sipping wine, and then dropped the bomb while my mom was pouring coffee. "It is such a shame Oliver will grow up without a father figure," she said, her voice carrying easily across the table. "Statistics don't lie. Boys without dads always end up troubled." I felt the blood rush to my face. "That is ridiculous, Holly," I shot back, keeping my voice steady for the sake of the holiday. "Plenty of single parents raise amazing kids. I am doing just fine." She shrugged a perfectly tailored shoulder, the gesture communicating pure dismissal. "Fine is not the same as whole." "Nolan?" She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at Oliver, who was laughing in my father's arms, as if she were staring at a child who was already doomed, marked by an irreversible flaw. My mom quickly changed the subject to the weather, giving me a nervous glance that pleaded, "Don't start drama." And that was the pattern for the next few years. By Oliver's 2nd birthday, Holly had escalated from veiled insults to outright pity, referring to him only as "that poor child." She would instruct Zoe and Blakely to be extra nice to your cousin, because he does not have a daddy like you do. The implication, hanging in the air like poison, was that Oliver was incomplete, a lesser version of a child. When Oliver turned 3 and started preschool, Holly cornered me at Thanksgiving. "Are you putting him in therapy yet for his abandonment issues?" she asked, her voice lowered to a stage whisper that everyone nearby could hear. "Better to handle it early. You do not want him to become damaged goods." Oliver was 3 and happy. He had no abandonment issues. He was just a kid who loved trucks and dinosaurs. But according to Holly, he was already damaged goods. The word bastard started slipping out after that, usually when she thought I was out of earshot. I'd overhear her whispering to Bryson in the kitchen about how embarrassing it was to have a bastard nephew, especially when Oliver's cousins were so accomplished. My anger grew into a cold, heavy lump in my chest that I carried into every family gathering. The breaking point was last summer's family reunion. Holly had been drinking wine all afternoon. Oliver, 5 years old and learning his boundaries, was playing with his cousins near the food tables. He accidentally knocked over Zoe's plastic cup of lemonade. Before I could reach him, Holly grabbed Oliver's arm and yanked him up so roughly he cried out. "This is what happens." She spat, her eyes narrowed with fury. "When bastards do not have fathers to teach them manners." Oliver pulled away and stumbled to me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he whispered, looking up at me. "What is a bastard?" 40 relatives went silent. Not a single person. Not my mother, not my father, not one aunt or uncle, said a word to Holly. They just stared at their shoes and at the ground. In front of our entire family, my sister had just taught my 5-year-old son that word by calling him one. That was the moment the years of forced peace shattered. I looked at the collective cowardice of my family, and then down at my weeping son. I knew then that I could no longer manage the conflict. I had to end it. I decided my sister, the the perfect one. Needed to learn exactly how it felt to be publicly humiliated, and I was going to make sure she never opened her mouth again. Nolan had tolerated the whispers and the pitying glances, but Holly's cruelty had escalated into something that could not be ignored. After the reunion, when I got Oliver settled down for the night, I felt a deep, cold certainty that I had never experienced before. I had spent 5 years being the bigger person, being the peacekeeper my mother constantly begged me to be, and all it had gotten me was the sight of my 5-year-old son crying and asking for the definition of a slur. I realized then that my silence had not been peace, it had been enabling. I had enabled Holly to be cruel, because she knew I would never fight back. I wasn't going to raise Oliver in a family where he was garbage to his aunt. I decided I would end the conflict, not by confronting Holly privately, which would only lead to her tears and denials, but by removing the foundation of her power. Her power lay entirely in her aid the perfect marriage, the perfect children, the perfect high-powered career. I knew if I could shatter that, I would shatter her ability to judge me. The revenge started that very night. I couldn't sleep, so I pulled out my laptop, my resentment turning into a cold, almost pleasurable focus. I started on social media. Holly was a ghost online, but Bryson, her investment banker husband, was not. I started with his public Instagram. He posted the usual pictures: golf, expensive steaks, his perfect wife, his perfect kids. But I scrolled back months, then years. I found what I was looking for, or at least, the seeds of it. Bryson commented a lot on one particular profile, his young, attractive assistant. The comments were just friendly enough to be defensible. Great vacation spot. Looks like you earned that. So jealous of that beach. But they were repetitive, often late at night, and always on her bikini photos. I took dozens of screenshots. They weren't proof of cheating, but they were suspicious enough to plant the seeds of doubt in a publicly destructive way. Holly had built her entire identity on having the ideal, faithful husband, something she constantly implied I lacked. This was the chink in that armor. I saved all the images to a new folder on my desktop labeled simply the truth. I switched my attention to her career. Holly never stopped talking about her high-flying job as an investment analyst. I had a cousin, Leah, who worked in the same financial building, and Leah had always been chatty. Over lunch a week later, I casually asked Leah how Holly's latest projects were going. Leah's eyes went wide. She swore me to secrecy, then spilled the news Holly's firm had just lost a huge, multi-million-dollar client, a client that was Holly's direct responsibility, because of a massive, careless mistake she had made. The mistake had not just cost money, it had nearly triggered a major lawsuit for the firm. Holly had been given an ultimatum: resign quietly or be fired publicly. She had chosen to resign, and the firm was letting her operate under the fiction that she was still employed while she searched for a new job, all to prevent public panic and market turmoil. The disaster had happened 3 months ago, and Holly had been hiding the reality from absolutely everyone, including her husband and our parents. She had been pretending work was going great, even bragging about an expected promotion at Thanksgiving. I sat there, sipping my iced tea, the cold determination in my chest solidifying into an immovable block. Holly was sitting on a ticking time bomb of financial and marital ruin, and she had the audacity to call my son a bastard. The irony was so perfect it almost made me smile. I had the 2 pillars of her perfect life, her marriage and her career, in my hands. I knew when the next family gathering was: Christmas dinner at my parents' house. I had 6 months to refine my plan. Over the coming weeks, every time I saw Oliver's face, my resolve hardened. He was more sensitive now, quieter around family members, still occasionally asking if Aunt Holly really thought he was bad. I would hold him and swear that by Christmas, the source of his pain would be silenced forever. I spent hours planning the delivery, the exact phrases I would use, and the sequence of the revelations. It couldn't be a shouting match. It had to be a surgical strike. It had to be delivered with the same saccharine politeness she used to wound me, but with the power of unassailable fact. I wanted Holly's facade to crumble, not because of my anger, but because the weight of her own secrets had become too much for her to bear. I felt no guilt, only a strange, cold pleasure in the power I now held. I was no longer the defensive single dad, I was the judge, and Christmas would be the execution. For weeks, The ringing silence of the family reunion lingered, but for Nolan, it was a productive silence, the sound of an elaborate trap being laid. I spent the next several months preparing for the Christmas dinner confrontation with a cold, almost surgical precision. My anger had cooled into a focused, calculating energy. I wasn't just planning a fight, I was planning an emotional demolition, and the construction of the perfect verbal weapons required patience. I returned often to the photos I had taken of Bryson's social media. The assistant, Jessica, was indeed attractive, and Bryson's comments were definitely over the line for a married man whose wife was a stickler for appearances. I had saved the screenshots where he offered to take her to the beach sometime, right after commenting on a bikini picture. It was not concrete proof of a physical affair, but it was enough to introduce a devastating, publicly acknowledged doubt into Holly's perfect marriage. The key was to deliver the information in a way that couldn't be ignored, but also couldn't be easily dismissed as my petty jealousy. I practiced the delivery in my head while driving to work, aiming for a tone that was sweet as sugar and utterly devastating. I planned to bring it up not as an accusation, but as a misguided compliment. Meanwhile, my internal life was getting quieter, consumed by this single driving purpose. At the physical therapy clinic, my friend and colleague Sarah Cooper noticed the change. Sarah, who often struggled to assert her own boundaries, was observant of others' emotional states. One Tuesday during our lunch break, she approached me while I was scrolling through the evidence folder on my phone. I quickly minimized the screen, but Sarah caught my expression. "You look stressed, Nolan," she said gently, leaning against my desk. "Since the reunion, you've been working like a machine, but you always seem angry. Everything okay with Oliver?" "Oliver is fine," I snapped, harsher than I intended. "Just preparing for the holidays. You know how Holly gets." Sarah paused. "It's more than Holly, isn't it? You have this look in your eyes like you're hunting something. Don't let her live in your head rent-free, Nolan. It's not worth it." I hated that she saw it. I hated that my obsession was becoming visible. "I am just handling something, Sarah. I need to handle it. Holly has pushed me too far, and I need to stop her." She looked genuinely concerned. "Retaliation never helps, Nolan. It usually just hurts the person carrying the burden." I dismissed her advice immediately, believing her gentle nature couldn't possibly understand the kind of toxic cruelty Holly wielded. I was convinced that only total destruction would work. I didn't want help, I wanted victory. Her concern only solidified my belief that I needed to keep this plan a secret, because anyone who tried to stop me was merely trying to restore the peace that had enabled Holly's abuse for so long. I also reached out to my cousin Lee again for more details on Holly's job loss. Leah, sensing the high drama, became a willing informant, sending me text updates and even forwarding me some internal company emails she shouldn't have had access to. These communications proved that Holly's mistake was far worse than simply losing a client. It involved legal liabilities and catastrophic losses, meaning she was truly forced out. I saved these too. They were the nuclear option, proof I could use if the first round of revelations failed to silence her. As Christmas approached, my focus was intense. I pictured the room, the relatives, the exact angle of the afternoon light on the dining table. I imagined the look on Holly's face when the perfect image she had spent a lifetime building evaporated in front of our entire extended family. I realized then that this was not just about protecting Oliver anymore. That was the initial justification. But now, this was about a cold, deep vengeance for every cruel comment, every slight, and every moment I had been forced to feel shame about being an independent single father. My enjoyment of the control I held over Holly's life was growing, filling the hollow space where my self-pity used to reside. I felt utterly committed to the pain I was about to inflict. The revenge was now entirely personal, and I found a dark, unsettling pleasure in the certainty of her impending downfall. I was ready. Christmas dinner arrived not as a celebration of family, but as the stage for a reckoning 5 years in the making. My parents' dining room was warm, filled with the aroma of roasting ham and pine needles. The long mahogany table was set for 15. I watched Holly and Bryson arrive. She was dressed impeccably, exuding the usual air of composed superiority, carrying a designer handbag and greeting everyone with practiced enthusiasm. I had never seen her look more like a brittle figurine. Oliver was coloring quietly in the corner, keeping a watchful eye on his aunt. I felt a surge of cold resolve. This was for him. Dinner started smoothly. My mother, Eleanor, kept nervously glancing between Holly and me, desperate to maintain the fragile holiday peace. She kept the conversation focused on neutral topics like the weather and traffic, but Holly couldn't resist. About halfway through the meal, Holly targeted me. "It is just lovely that you were able to take today off, Nolan," she said, cutting into her food with delicate precision. "I know single parents have such limited flexibility. We were just saying how important structure is for the children, and especially for boys. They really need that consistent male role model, don't they, Bryson?" Bryson, sitting beside her, mumbled in agreement, entirely unaware of the razor's edge he was balanced on. I smiled, a genuine, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Absolutely, Holly. It is so important. Speaking of male role models, it is really nice that Bresson is such a mentor at his company too. Especially to the young women." Holly paused, her fork hovering inches from her mouth. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, I just meant that lovely assistant of his," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "It is so refreshing to see a successful married man like Bryson so committed to supporting young female friendships. I mean, all those supportive comments on Jessica's social media, and on her beach photos too. It is just so sweet and modern." Holly's face went white, her composure cracking. She shot a horrified, sharp glance at Bresson, whose own face was slowly draining of color. He started stammering, pushing his plate away. "Nolan, I don't know what you are looking at. It is just work relationships. Strictly professional." I leaned back comfortably in my chair. "Of course, Bryson. I only saw genuine support. You know, like the comment where you offered to take her to the beach. That is real mentoring." Zoe and Blakely. I turned to their daughters sitting across the table. "You are lucky to have parents who trust each other so much." The tension in the room was excruciating. The casual dinner noise had evaporated. My mother was staring at the table, clutching her napkin. My father, Marcus, looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion, sensing a catastrophe but not understanding the cause. Holly tried desperately to seize control. "Nolan, that is enough. You have absolutely no right to look at my husband's private social media or twist innocent interactions." "You are right, Holly," I interrupted, cutting her off smoothly. "I should stick to subjects that are family business. For example, your career." I turned to my Aunt Charlotte, who had asked Holly earlier about work. "Holly is being so modest about her big moves at the firm recently," I said, projecting my voice to reach the entire table. Holly's eyes were wide with panic. "Nolan, stop talking about work. We are at Christmas dinner." I ignored her. "I hear she has been handling a massive situation with such grace. That major client loss, the one that cost the firm millions, that must have been incredibly stressful." I paused, looking directly at her, maintaining my sickeningly sweet smile. "Have you found new clients to cover the lost revenue yet, Holly? All those millions in revenue, gone." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just a lull in conversation. It was the sound of a shattering illusion. Bresson's head snapped toward Holly. He was no longer stammering about his assistant. He was staring at his wife with pure betrayal. "Client loss? What client loss, Holly? You said everything was fine. You told me you were getting a promotion." Holly was trapped. The secret she had buried for 3 months had been unearthed and laid bare for 40 relatives. Her cheeks went from pale white to a furious, blotchy red. She had to admit it. It was a minor setback. "Bryson," she choked out, her voice trembling. "I was handling it. It was a private matter. My Uncle Mark, an accountant, jumped in, asking pointedly, 'A setback that cost millions.' That is not minor, Holly. Is everything all right with your job?" I jumped back in before Holly could recover. I kept my voice soft as I addressed her children again. "You should be so proud of your mother for handling that disaster with such grace. Isn't it amazing how she keeps showing up to these events, pretending nothing is wrong, even after losing an account that big?" The pretense, the entire careful life Holly had constructed, disintegrated in minutes. Bryson grabbed her arm, his composure gone, and yanked her violently toward the kitchen. Through the doorway, we could all hear his furious, low voice demanding to know why this was the first he had heard about her career being destroyed. He kept asking, "Millions, Holly. How could you hide losing millions of dollars from your own husband? My mother looked at me, her expression a mix of horror and shock. I just smiled, picked up my fork, and took another bite of the Christmas ham. I felt utterly calm. A few minutes later, Holly emerged, her mascara running down her cheeks, her hair slightly disheveled. "We are leaving," she announced to the room. She was practically shaking as she grabbed her children's coats. She paused at the doorway, turning to look straight at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying hatred. "You will regret this, Nolan," she hissed. I met her gaze and spoke clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have been regretting staying quiet for 5 years while you tortured my son, Holly. So, we are even now." The door slammed so hard that the old windows rattled. For several long, agonizing minutes, the entire family sat in absolute silence, staring at their expensive Christmas dinner plates, which now felt as cold and hard as stone. The illusion of family peace was irrevocably broken. The ringing silence of the house the morning after Christmas was quickly replaced by the constant buzz of a divided family demanding answers. I woke up the next morning to the relentless vibrating of my phone. Text after text rolled in from every corner of the extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had witnessed or heard about the explosion at the dinner table. It was clear the family had split instantly, and I spent the first hour of Christmas morning scrolling through the fallout. My Aunt Sarah sent 3 paragraphs about how families should support each other through hard times and that airing dirty laundry in public, especially about marriage and career, was crossing an unforgivable line. Uncle Mark wrote that I was entirely out of line, bringing up work issues that were none of my business to share. But then there was Cousin Jake, who simply wrote, "She had it coming. Glad someone finally called her out. She's been cruel to Oliver for 5 years." Another cousin admitted they were relieved someone finally stood up to her, stating they had been watching Holly's nastiness for years and felt powerless to intervene. I sat in bed, watching the phone buzz with new messages every few minutes, and the true magnitude of what I had done hit me. I had successfully blown up our entire family dynamic in one dramatic dinner. The vindication I felt was immense, but it was quickly being overshadowed by the sheer, exhausting mess I had created. Around 10 o'clock, my mother, Eleanor, called. I could tell she had been crying before she even said hello. She begged me to call Holly and apologize, saying the family could not handle this kind of drama, and someone needed to be the bigger person. "Why me, Mom?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why should I apologize when Holly spent 5 years calling my son a bastard, and you never once asked her to say sorry?" "That was different, Nolan," my mother insisted, her voice trembling. "She never meant to hurt anyone. She just had strong opinions about family structure." I actually laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Calling a 5-year-old child a bastard to his face is not having opinions, Mom. It is cruelty, and you and Dad enabled it by always choosing peace over my son's dignity. My mother started crying harder. "You are tearing the family apart. Can't you just smooth things over for everyone's sake?" "I am done smoothing things over while my son is treated like garbage," I told her, my voice firm. "If the family cannot handle me defending Oliver, then maybe they need to pick better battles." She hung up on me, something she had never done in my entire life. Around noon, Holly's response came in. It was a vicious, lengthy text message that spanned 3 separate notifications. She wrote that I was a jealous, bitter single parent. She still refused to acknowledge the father part, who could not stand to see her happy and successful. She accused me of twisting innocent social media comments to destroy her marriage out of pure spite, claiming I hated that she had everything I wanted. She asserted that bringing up the work situation was a low blow because I had no right to discuss her private failures. She ended by stating I was a terrible brother who prioritized revenge over family unity, and that Oliver would grow up learning it was acceptable to hurt people who made you angry. I took screenshots of every single message. The aggressive, absolute denial and deflection told me everything I needed to know. I had hit way closer to the truth than she wanted to admit. If the assistant were truly just a friend, Holly wouldn't be this defensive. I saved the messages to the folder and didn't reply, letting her sit there, wondering if I would leak her rant to the rest of the family. That afternoon, my father, Marcus, called. I braced myself for another lecture about harmony and being the bigger person. Instead, he said, "I am proud of you, son. She went too far." I almost dropped the phone. My dad never took sides. He was the perpetual peacekeeper. "Your mother and I heard her comments for years," he confessed, sounding exhausted. "But we convinced ourselves she didn't mean anything by it. We thought confronting her would make it worse. But watching her grab Oliver's arm and call him that while he cried at the reunion, that made me realize our silence was not peace. It was enablement." He admitted he should have shut Holly down the first time she opened her mouth about Oliver. He told me he had talked to Mom and told her they needed to stop protecting Holly from the consequences of her cruelty, just because she was their daughter. "Oliver is lucky to have a father who will fight for him," he said, and I started crying silently. Having my dad's support meant everything. Holly needed to learn that treating people badly eventually catches up with you. This blow-up might be necessary, even if it is painful. Despite my father's support, the consequences started filtering in quickly. Over the next few days, I noticed Oliver was quieter whenever anyone mentioned family gatherings. He stopped talking about wanting to play with his cousins. My revenge had protected him from Holly, but it had introduced a new layer of tension and anxiety that was beginning to affect him more than I realized. I had achieved victory, but the battle was far from over. Every passing week brought a new piece of shrapnel from the explosion, and the cost of his victory was now being paid in the one currency Nolan cared about: Oliver's peace. The first week of January, I ran into my cousin Lee at the grocery store. She pulled me aside near the produce section, speaking in a conspiratorial whisper. She told me that Bresson had moved out of Holly's house right after New Year's. Leah had heard it from Holly's neighbor, who saw him loading boxes into his car on January 2nd. Apparently, Holly had confronted Bresson about the assistant, Jessica, the day after Christmas. Bresson admitted to having what he called an emotional affair. He swore nothing physical had happened yet, but he had been texting Jessica constantly and had taken her to lunch multiple times without telling Holly. Holly demanded he cut all contact, but Bryson said he had developed genuine feelings for the assistant and needed space to figure things out. He got an apartment near his office. Lee said Holly was a complete mess, crying to anyone who would listen about how her perfect marriage was falling apart. Part of me felt fiercely vindicated. My comments about Bryson had hit a real nerve, confirming I hadn't made something out of nothing like Holly claimed. I hadn't destroyed her marriage. I had merely forced an existing cancer into the light. But another, quieter part of me recognized the extremity of my actions. I had chosen to expose a private marital failure in the most public and humiliating way possible. I stood in the grocery aisle holding a bag of apples and wondered if I had gone too far. Then I remembered Oliver crying at the reunion asking what a bastard was. The guilt faded quickly. A few days later, my phone rang during lunch. It was Oliver's preschool teacher, Harper. She sounded concerned. She said Oliver had been acting out in class over the past week, pushing other kids during playtime, and saying mean things he had never said before. Yesterday, he told another student that his daddy said some people deserve to feel bad. Today, he had pushed a girl off a swing and called her stupid. Harper emphasized that this behavior was completely out of character for Oliver, who was usually one of the sweetest kids in class. She gently suggested that the family tension I had mentioned at pickup last week might be affecting his behavior more than I realized. She recommended counseling to help him process whatever he was picking up at home. I hung up the phone feeling physically ill, like I had been punched in the gut. Protecting Oliver was my entire reason for confronting Holly at Christmas. And now he was the one suffering the fallout. He was acting out, saying cruel things, and it was because of the family war I had started. I had thought standing up to Holly would show Oliver that I would always defend him. Instead, I had created an environment where he was learning that hurting people was acceptable when you were angry. The collateral damage continued to spread. I learned more about Holly's job situation. She hadn't just lost a client, she had been forced to resign. Her mistake involved giving catastrophic bad advice, and her bosses had given her the choice: resign quietly or be fired publicly, facing potential legal liability. Then Bryson showed up at my apartment looking furious, demanding to know why I had decided to destroy his family at Christmas dinner. Why did you make my private relationship with my assistant a public scandal? He yelled, storming into my living room. Holly is telling everyone I am a cheater. My parents are calling me a disappointment. I waited until he was done ranting, then asked him coolly, how long were you planning to leave Holly for your assistant? He stammered. It wasn't like that. We were just friends. Friends do not comment on each other's bikini photos with heart emojis and offers to go to the beach together, Bryson. I countered, my voice low and dangerous. Maybe instead of yelling at me, you should ask your wife why she was so cruel to a child for 5 years. Bryson actually defended her. Holly's comments about Oliver were just her being honest about the challenges of single parenthood. You are too sensitive. That was it. That defense of her cruelty broke the last piece of my composure. Get out of my apartment, I said, pointing toward the door. And if you ever defend Holly calling my son a bastard again, I will make sure everyone knows exactly how many times you took your assistant to lunch on company time. He left immediately, his face red with fear and humiliation. The consequences filtered back to Holly's children, too. My cousin told me that parents at their expensive private school had heard the full saga, the job loss, the husband leaving for the assistant, and had started excluding Zoe and Blakely from playdates and birthday parties. The private community was tight-knit and judgmental. Their violin teacher, who was friends with one of the exclusionary mothers, had even dropped Blakely as a student. I felt genuinely sick reading about what was happening to two innocent children who had nothing to do with their mother's cruelty or my public revenge. Zoe and Blakely were paying the price for adult conflicts they hadn't caused. My act of protection was turning into a cascade of unintended, ugly damage. The cost of vengeance felt staggeringly high. The sight of Oliver's face, etched with guilt over adult choices, was the mirror Nolan needed to see that the war had become uglier than the abuse it sought to punish. The emotional toll of the protracted family war was finally consuming me. I was exhausted from months of white-hot anger, and that anger was now turning inward. My coworker, Sarah, confronted me again one afternoon during a brief lull between patients. I am worried about you, Nolan, she said, her voice soft but firm. You have become obsessed with tracking Holly's situation. I see you scrolling on every break, looking for updates. You seem angrier now than you were right after Christmas. I snapped at her. I am fine, Sarah. Mind your own business. She didn't flinch. No, you are not fine. Your anger is starting to affect how you treat people. You were short with Mrs. Davison this morning when she asked about rescheduling, and you barely made eye contact. We cannot afford to lose clients over this family vendetta, Nolan. Your professional reputation is suffering. I felt my face burn with a mix of embarrassment and fury, but I knew she was right. I had been short, distracted, and consumed. I walked away from her, realizing I was facing professional consequences for defending my son, while Holly, the one who had started the cruelty, was generating sympathy for her downfall. Later that day, my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. He had been calling less frequently, caught in the impossible middle, supporting me while also trying to help Holly navigate her crisis. I listened to his tired message. He said he loved me, but he couldn't keep choosing sides in this war. I had successfully forced everyone to pick a camp, and in doing so, I had isolated myself. My entire support system was crumbling under the weight of the family warfare I had orchestrated. The next week, I heard more about Holly's financial situation. My cousin called again, relaying that Holly's forced resignation meant she had lost unvested stock options worth over $200,000. Combined with Bryson leaving, she might have to sell the perfect house she always bragged about because she couldn't afford the mortgage on her own. Relatives were draining their savings to help her stay afloat, gifting her $5,000 here, covering 2 months of her girls' private school tuition there. I realized my Christmas revelation had created a domino effect that was now hurting people who had nothing to do with the original conflict. Family members were sacrificing their own financial stability to help Holly survive the chaos I had unleashed. I sat on the floor surrounded by clean laundry, wondering how protecting Oliver had turned into a full-blown financial crisis for half the family tree. My vengeance felt hollow, heavy with unintended cost. The final emotional blow came from Oliver. On a Friday afternoon drive home from press school, he was unusually quiet. I asked if something happened. A kid told me something at recess, he said, fiddling with his seat belt. He looked small and vulnerable. Did I make Aunt Holly's family fall apart because she was mean to me? My stomach dropped. I immediately pulled the car into a parking lot and turned to face him. He said the kid at school told him I ruined everything at Christmas, and now his cousins were sad. His eyes filled with tears, and he asked, "Is it my fault her family is broken?" I unbuckled my seat belt and scrambled into the back seat to hug him tightly. "Absolutely none of this is your fault, Oliver," I whispered into his hair. "Adults sometimes make big mistakes when they are trying to protect people they love." "Did you make a mistake?" he asked, his voice wavering. I struggled for an answer. "Protecting you was right, sweetheart. But maybe I did it in a way that hurt more people than was necessary." Oliver was taking on guilt for adult conflicts he couldn't possibly understand. He was learning that the world was not a simple place of good people and bad people, but a confusing mess where protection could be indistinguishable from cruelty. Then, that evening, while scrolling through Facebook, I saw Brezen's relationship status update. He was now listed as in a relationship with Jessica Smith, the assistant. Holly's worst fear had come true. She was now a single mother, facing the exact situation she had spent 5 years mocking me for, but compounded by career ruin and financial disaster. I sat there, staring at photos of them smiling at restaurants. Holly had hit rock bottom. Continuing to enjoy her downfall served no purpose except cruelty, and I was utterly exhausted from being cruel. The next morning, I woke up, and the path forward was suddenly clear. I opened my laptop and found the folder where I had saved the nuclear option, the screenshots of Holly's forced resignation details, the internal firm emails proving the true, catastrophic extent of her mistake. I had planned to share them with the relatives who still doubted the severity of her situation, to defend my honor. I stared at the files for a long time. I realized Oliver didn't need me to completely destroy his aunt to feel protected. At some point, revenge crosses the line from justice into something uglier, and I had already crossed it. The vengeance I sought had become indistinguishable from Holly's own cruelty. I needed to stop the cycle of harm. I selected every file in the folder and hit delete. I watched the screen as the files vanished, and then I emptied the trash folder. A heavy burden, the weight of months of righteous, hateful anger, lifted from my chest. I felt something shift inside me. I was done with the war. I was ready to see if there was a way forward that didn't require total destruction. Deleting the files did not erase the wreckage, but it cleared the way for Nolan to rebuild a family on truth, not fear or vengeance. 2 days after deleting the final evidence, I called Holly's cell phone. She answered on the third ring, and a heavy silence hung between us. I told her I had read her email, the one where she offered an apology but demanded boundaries, and that I was willing to meet her somewhere neutral, without our parents. Holly suggested a small park, halfway between our 2 houses. We agreed to meet that Sunday at 2 o'clock. When I arrived, Holly was already sitting at a picnic table. She looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of her expensive armor and confidence. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like the insecure older sister I remembered from high school than the ruthless investment analyst. I sat down across from her. She started talking first, her voice raw. She apologized for years of cruel comments about Oliver. She admitted she was jealous that I seemed happy as a single father while she was miserable and isolated in her perfect marriage. She confessed she couldn't stand seeing me content with less, because it meant her struggle for perfection was meaningless. She confessed she couldn't stand seeing me content with less, because it meant her struggle for perfection was meaningless. Calling Oliver a bastard was unforgivable, Nolan, she said, her voice catching. It was never about him. It was me projecting my own shame onto you. I truly understand if you never want to speak to me again. I swallowed, tasting the metallic flavor of months of stored anger finally dissipating. And I went too far at Christmas, Holly, I admitted, the confession feeling heavy but necessary. Publicly destroying your life was further than necessary. I could have confronted you privately about Oliver's well-being instead of exposing your secrets in front of everyone. We both started crying then, the release of tension overwhelming. We agreed we had hurt each other enough, trading years of emotional abuse for one single devastating act of revenge. we were even. The next Tuesday, Holly texted, asking if she could come to my apartment to apologize to Oliver directly. I asked Oliver, who had been quieter and more guarded since the reunion, if he wanted to see his aunt. He nodded, tentatively. Holly arrived at 6 o'clock with a stuffed dinosaur that was nearly as big as Oliver. She sat down on the floor with him and, in simple, clear language, told him she had said mean things because she was sad inside, and that none of it was his fault. She was sorry for making him feel bad. Oliver looked at the dinosaur, then at Holly. "Are you still sad?" he asked. Holly took a deep breath. "I am working on feeling better, sweetie. I promise." Oliver hugged her, then looked at the dinosaur, and then asked the simple question that broke the last of the adult tension. "Can my cousins come play sometime?" The simplicity of his request made both Holly and me realize how much we had complicated something that could have been resolved much earlier. If only Holly had been honest, and if only I hadn't let my anger fester. Oliver ran off to play, and Holly and I sat on the couch in a new, cautious silence. We both knew we would never be close sisters. That version of our relationship was gone forever. But maybe we could be civil for the children's sake. Over the following weeks, Holly and I started texting about normal things: what the kids were doing in school, Oliver's latest antics, Holly's job search. She sent me a job posting for a smaller investment firm, acknowledging the pay was less than half what she used to make. I could tell she was scared about starting over as a single, working parent, facing the exact reality she used to mock me for, but she was trying to stay positive for her girls. My mom called, relieved, but I gave her boundaries. I told her we were working on rebuilding, but she needed to stop expecting us to go back to how things were before, because that relationship was built on Holly's cruelty and everyone's silence about it. 3 months passed. I got a call from Harper, Oliver's preschool teacher. My stomach dropped instantly, assuming the worst, but she quickly reassured me. "Oliver is doing much better, Nolan," she said. "He is back to his normal, happy self. He is playing well with the other children, and the aggressive behavior has completely stopped since the family drama calmed down. He seems more secure and confident." That was the only confirmation I needed. My act of vengeance had carried a high cost, professionally and personally, but Oliver was safe. He was whole. The 4th of July arrived, and my parents hosted a barbecue. I arrived early and found Holly already there. We worked side by side, arranging plates, our conversation carefully polite. Both of us were acutely aware that the entire family was watching to see how we would interact. The atmosphere was strained compared to the fake harmony we used to have. My uncle made an uncomfortable joke about keeping the peace this year, and everyone laughed too loud. But Holly's girls ran straight to Oliver, completely unbothered by the adult weirdness. I watched Holly watching her daughters and Oliver playing. She asked how my work was going, and she actually listened instead of looking for ways to one-up me. She mentioned she had gotten the job at the smaller firm and was starting next week. I saw both relief and fear in her eyes. By the time the fireworks started that evening, I realized our family had permanently changed into something more honest, but way less comfortable than before. We would never go back to pretending everything was perfect, with Holly's fake achievements and everyone ignoring her mean comments. Maybe that was healthier than the fake peace that had allowed her behavior to continue for years. Oliver looked up at the fireworks, standing beside his cousins, and smiled. In that moment, I knew we had all survived the mess. Holly had learned that calling a child a bastard had real consequences, and I had learned that revenge, while satisfying, leaves a messy, complicated aftermath. Oliver was safe now, and he knew I would always defend him, even if that defense meant breaking the peace. That knowledge, born of conflict, mattered more than anything else.